Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's Game of Thrones video on why Shae's storyline was awesome. So, after making a whole bunch of videos looking forward to Season 5, I thought it was time to take a look back on the previous 4 seasons that aired, and in this video I will specifically focus on the storyline involving the show character of Shae. So, you're safe from spoilers as long as you've seen the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones, although I will make a lot of comparisons to the books and talk a bit about what was different from the books to the show, but I won't talk about anything in the books that the show hasn't covered yet. So, I had the idea to make this video for several reasons. For one, the Shae and Tyrion storyline from Season 4 was one of my favorite storylines from that season, and secondly, I heard a lot of people complaining about Shae's storyline from Season 4 and saying they really didn't like it. However, I want to make it clear this video isn't about trying to prove that those people are wrong. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions, and if you think her storyline sucked, that's fine, but I personally loved it, and I just want to explain why I loved it and clear up what I think are some misconceptions about her storyline in the Game of Thrones show. So to summarize, it's a tragic love story about 2 people in love, but because Tyrion thinks her life is in danger, he tries to trick her into leaving, convinces her he never loved her, but the lie worked so well that she felt completely hurt by him, and that anger was used against him at his trial, which eventually led to them being enemies and a struggle where Tyrion had to kill the woman he loved. To me, this is a classic tragic love story used in many Shakespearean as well as other classical stories where someone comes up with a plan to save a loved one and it ends up backfiring on them in the most tragic way. This is quite different from how Shae's storyline played out in the books. Now, I personally prefer her story from the show, however, I feel they both work in the context of the overall story they were placed in. Her storyline in the books really works for the books and serves the purpose it should, and her storyline in the show really works for the show and serves the purpose it should there. Frankly, most of the complaints I've heard about her storyline in the show came from people who've read the books first, and in my opinion they are getting the 2 very different stories about 2 very different characters a bit confused and mixed up. A lot of people felt that Shae's storyline in Season 4 should have been resolved more like it was in the books, but I felt that would have been completely out of place since her storyline in the show had already been severely altered. And that the show needed to resolve that storyline, the one that they set up, which in my opinion they did, and they actually managed to do so in a manner that was rather similar to what had occurred in the books. So basically, Book Shae and Show Shae are 2 entirely different characters. Book Shae was a prostitute who loved living in luxury, so used Tyrion to acquire wealth, and when he was no longer useful to her, she turned against him in the most vile way and went to someone who could give her wealth she desired. Whereas Show Shae was a strong, independent woman from Lorath who formed a bond with Tyrion and Sansa, so it tore her apart to see them married, so when her worst fears that her lover saw her as nothing but a whore was realized, she was heartbroken with nothing else to do, so when she was coerced, she turned against him and did what she needed to do to survive. In fact, I would say they aren't at all the same character, and they should have different names, much in the same way that Jane Westerling and Talisa Majory are 2 different characters and thus have 2 different names, despite the fact they serve the same narrative purpose of being Robb Stark's wife. In fact, I would say the only trait Shae from the book and Shae from the show share is that they're both prostitute who ends up working exclusively for Tyrion, and I would say the similarity is pretty much in there, although they end up serving the same narrative function much in the same way Vargo Hoat and Locke serve the same narrative function, but they are in fact 2 entirely different characters. So I'm going to address several complaints I heard about how Shae's storyline was resolved in Season 4. The first one is that someone felt that Shae's violently going after Tyrion was completely against her character, To which I would reply, you're thinking of book Shae. It is totally and completely in show Shae's character to do this, as there are many scenes that establish her as a tough and violent person.
And don't talk about my mother and father ever, or I will carve your eyes from your head.
The Queen said they'd rape everyone.
No one is raping me.
One theory I've heard is that on the show, Shae never loved Tyrion and was just using him the whole time and just discarded him when she no longer had use for him. Again, I would have to say you're thinking of book Shae. However, this is where I get into what I think was the biggest flaw in her storyline in the show, and that is that you kind of have to remember the details of earlier seasons in order to follow this prolonged storyline. And unless you rewatched the first 3 seasons before watching season 4, like I did several times, then you might not remember exactly how much Tyrion and Shae loved each other, as indeed I've heard this opinion expressed by people who haven't even read the books. But to me, the true nature of their relationship was revealed in the season 2 finale, which the actress even reminded people in an interview.
You have a shit memory. I am yours, and you are mine.
Also, if you watch the scenes in season 4 where Tyrion pushes Shae away and tells her she's just a whore, it's extremely clear the way Sybil Kekili played it that Shae was completely crushed by this, and in fact was a very emotional scene. She would only be crushed like this if she really loved him.
You'll have a comfortable life in Pentos. Bronn will escort you to your ship.
Furthermore, in an interview with Entertainment Weekly, George R.R. Martin even agreed that Shae really did love Tyrion in the show and had this to say about it. Shae is much more sincere in her affections for Tyrion. With Shae in the TV series, you can tell she actually has feelings for Tyrion. She challenges him. She defies him. The Shae in the books is a manipulative camp follower prostitute who doesn't give a shit about Tyrion any more than she would any other Jon. But she's very compliant, like a little teenage sex kitten, feeding all of his fantasies. One complaint I heard from non-book readers is that Shae was just all whiny and jealous and gets really annoying, how she keeps pestering Tyrion and doesn't take the threat from Cersei seriously, because sure enough, she gets caught because she's in Tyrion's bedchamber yelling at him at a time where she shouldn't be. I can certainly see how she could be annoying. However, I think these scenes are instrumental in establishing her character. Basically, even though she hides it under a layer of toughness, she's afraid. What she's most afraid of is that she's worthless and just has, just a lowborn whore who is being used and will be discarded. She's afraid Tyrion doesn't love her and will just leave her for a more noble woman like Sansa. And the show does an excellent job at establishing this, and that's why all the scenes with Shae being jealous of Sansa are crucial to the overarching story, because this is one of the main reasons why Tyrion's plan to save her backfires so badly, because what he ends up doing is realizing her worst fears, that she's just a whore to him. And I noticed some people who thought she was stupid for not realizing that Tyrion was just sending her away to save her life, but you have to remember 2 things. One, she doesn't believe her life is in danger, which is why Tyrion needed to do this ruse in the first place. And 2, her greatest fears in life were just realized. When your greatest fears come true, you're not exactly thinking rationally. You're thinking, I was right all along. He does think I'm worthless. And I personally thought this was executed in the show brilliantly. Another complaint that I heard from book readers and non-book readers alike is that they didn't quite get why Shae testified against Tyrion at the trial in the show. To me, looking back at her prolonged story arc over the 4 seasons, I felt it was obvious and that the reasons were twofold. One, she felt hurt and betrayed by him, but more importantly, she was being coerced by Tywin and Cersei. If you recall, in episode 2 of season 4, after Cersei had discovered who Shae was, she told Tywin about it, who had this to say about it.
I were brought to the Tower of the Hound before the wedding.
After that, Tyrion tried to smuggle her out of the city, but we have to assume that for whatever reason that attempt was unsuccessful, and considering where she ends up in episode 10, that she was indeed brought to Tywin's bedchamber as he commanded. Now, I do think a lot of the confusion over this is understandable because a lot of this takes place off-screen, forcing viewers to make assumptions and to draw their own connections. But if you look carefully, you can see little clues like that. I also have to assume that at this point, after Tyrion abandoned her and made it clear he didn't care for her and wouldn't help her, that she was brought to Tywin. She had to help herself and look out for number one. And although she had loved Tyrion, since he was the one who cut off ties with her, she had no longer owed him any allegiance. So if that meant throwing him under a bus in order to save her own life, and if that meant sleeping with Tywin, then that's what she had to do. In fact, Sybil Kekili had this to say about it. "Don't hate Shae. She truly loved Tyrion. I really mean it. In that trial scene, she's talking, looking for words. She's looking at Tyrion's sister, his father, when she says her lines. It's like, okay, she had to say that. She understood that." Anyway, so this is the actress who played her, basically saying that she played the scene under the understanding that she was being coerced by Cersei and Tywin. And I think it's pretty safe assumption that this is in line with the direction she was given. So in other words, the show was trying to indicate to the audience that she was being manipulated by Tywin and Cersei, and that answers the question as to why she testified against him. Furthermore, I would submit this part of the scene.
Shae, please don't.
I am a whore. Remember?
The way Sybil Kekili played that made it clear that she was still really hurt by what Tyrion did to her, and because of that felt no reason to stick her neck out for him. Also, you know, the way she said it revealed she didn't think of herself as just a whore, but that that was what Tyrion had reduced her to by pushing her away, and so she had to revert back to old habits in order to survive. So another thing I heard some people complain about, in fact one of the biggest complaints I heard from book readers, was that they didn't like how the show changed Tyrion's motivation in killing Shae from straight up murder to self-defense. And if I'm going to be completely honest, I'm absolutely shocked by this opinion. Because before I even saw season 4, knowing how her storyline ended in the books, I was curious how they would handle it in the show, because I knew that they couldn't handle it the same way, because it would make no sense at all. In fact, I suspect that they would completely change it up and have Tywin kill Shae instead. However, they ended up sticking closer to the books than I had suspected, and had Tyrion kill Shae after all, but made it work by changing it to self-defense instead of straight-up murder, which, although worked for the books, would have been completely out of place given everything they established about Tyrion and Shae's relationship in the show. These same people usually make the complaint that they did it to make Tyrion more heroic, to whitewash his character, and thus simplify his character while not staying true to it in order to appease audiences and make Peter Dinklage look more like this heroic hero type. That, however, is not how I would describe it. I would describe it as, for good or for ill, they have already changed Tyrion's character from the books. This probably grew organically based on Peter Dinklage's performance. However, from the first season, he has always been slightly more admirable than his book counterpart. So I would make the argument, by the time we get to the season 4 finale, having Tyrion murder Shae in cold blood would be completely and utterly out of character for show Tyrion, and would be quite jarring for someone who hadn't read the books. They'd be like, what the fuck is he doing? So as I said with Shae, I'd say the same thing for Tyrion, and that people are confusing book Tyrion with show Tyrion, and the show needs to stay true to the character of Tyrion, how he is portrayed in the show. And having him outright murder Shae like that would be totally, completely out of character for show Tyrion. Not to mention the fact that their relationship was already completely different from the books. Alright, now I saw some arguments made online that Tyrion killing Shae in the show would not be out of character for him, considering how she testified against him at the trial. And to address that, I would like to show you the two versions of Shae's testimony from the book and from the show, and see if you notice any difference. First, from the show.
I was his whore.
I beg your pardon? You said you were his...
His whore.
How did you come to be in his service?
He stole me. I was with another man, a knight in your lordship's army. But when Tyrion arrived at the camp, he sent one of his cutthroats into our tent. He broke the knight's arm and brought me to Lord Tyrion. You belong to me now, he said. I want you to fuck me like it's my last night in this world.
Silence! Silence!
And did you?
Did I what?
Fuck him like it was his last night in this world?
I did everything he wanted. Whatever he told me to do to him, whatever he felt like doing to me. I kissed him where he wanted, I licked him where he wanted. I let him put himself where he wanted. I was his property. I would wait in his chambers for hours so he could use me when he was bored. He ordered me to call him my lion, so I did. I took his face in my hands and said, I am yours and you are mine.
And now from the book.
But most I had from his own lips. I wasn't only Lady Sansa's maid, I was his whore. All the time he was here in King's Landing. On the morning of the wedding, he dragged me down where they kept the dragon skulls and fucked me there with the monsters all around. And when I cried, he said I ought to be more grateful that it wasn't every girl who got to be the king's whore. That was when he told me how he meant to be king. He said that poor boy Joffrey would never know his bride the way he was knowing me. She started sobbing then. I never meant to be a whore, my lords. I was to be married. A squire he was, and a good brave boy, gentle born. But the imp saw me at the Green Fork, and put the boy I meant to marry in the front rank of the van. And after he was killed, he sent his wildlings to bring me to his tent. Shagger, the big one, and Timmet with a burned eye. He said if I didn't pleasure him, he'd give me to them. So I did. And then he brought me to the city, so I'd be close when he wanted me. He made me do such shameful things.
Prince Oberyn looked furious. What sort of things?
Unspeakable things.
As the tears rolled slowly down that pretty face, no doubt every man in the hall wanted to take Shae in his arms and comfort her.
With my mouth and other parts, my lord. All my parts. He used me every way there was, and he used to make me tell him how big he was. My giant, I had to call him. My giant of Lannister.
Notice the difference? Basically, in the show, she told the truth, but with a slight twist that made him appear guilty. The only outright lie she told is that he plotted with Sansa to kill Joffrey. In the books, however, she hard out lied. Everything she said was a lie, with just a couple of nuggets of truth sprinkled in there. Plus, she really played the sympathy card to make herself appear like the victim. It was a complete performance that made it obvious she never really cared about Tyrion. I remember when I first read this chapter thinking, hell, I'd want to strangle her too. She flat out played him for a fool. Not so in the show. In the show, the fact she sticks so closely to the truth was almost more heart-wrenching for Tyrion because she made a public things involving their private relationships so people could laugh at them. Again, it was obvious that Shae in the show was hurt and being coerced. So I say ultimately, even though what she did in the show did hurt Tyrion, and even if he wasn't aware she was being coerced, it didn't quite warrant a death sentence. However, when Tyrion found her in her father's bed, that was the final nail in the coffin. You could see on Peter Dinklage's face how hurt he was to find her there, and it was an amazing performance. And so Shae, who had, thoroughly been established in the show as a tough character, first reaction naturally is to defend herself. And so Tyrion ultimately ends up killing the woman he loves in the midst of feeling hurt and betrayed while defending himself. Now, let me discuss the elephant in the room. The main complaint I've heard from book readers that hated the scene in the finale, and that was the exclusion of Tysha. Tysha was Tyrion's first wife, who was mentioned in season 1 of the show, where it was explained that after the night they married, Tyrion discovered she was a whore that Jaime had hired to pleasure him, and Tywin not only made them end their marriage, but had a dozen men in his army have sex with her while forcing Tyrion to watch. In the books, when Jaime freed Tyrion from the Black Cells, he revealed to Tyrion that his first wife Tysha was in fact not a whore, and that their father made him lie to Tyrion about it. This, of course, enraged Tyrion, who vowed to kill Jaime if he ever saw him again, and he went to Tywin's bedchamber to confront him about it. And instead found Shae in his father's bed, who he quickly killed before going to confront his father about what he did to his first wife, Tysha. And it was because Tywin called Tysha a whore that Tyrion shot and killed him. In the show, however, no such revelation was revealed. Tyrion and Jaime part on good terms. Then Tyrion goes to confront Tywin, presumably about why he almost had him killed, and instead finds Shae in his bedchamber. As struggle ensues, he ends up killing her in self-defense, and then goes to confront Tywin about how he was sleeping with his lover that he killed, and it's safe to assume he blames Tywin for putting him in that situation that led to her death. And because Tywin calls Shae a whore, Tyrion kills him. I know a lot of people were upset about this change, and I will agree with this. It is a lot more nicely tied up and explained in the books than it is in the show, because in the show, Tyrion's reasons for going to Tywin's bedchamber aren't as clear. That was the one part of the show I felt seemed a little out of place. However, overall, I felt this worked better for the show, and the other storyline that worked well for the books wouldn't quite fit in the show. First of all, in the books, you get Tyrion constantly thinking about Tysha through a lot of his point of view chapters. So even though you don't see her in present tense per se, she remains a reoccurring character throughout the first 3 books. Whereas in the show, she's mentioned once in the second to last episode of the first season, and then a couple of vague references are made to her in season 3. To make someone who was only casually referred to a major plot point in season 4, in the season 4 finale, would have been a bad move that people who hadn't read the books wouldn't have bought, as it would seem completely out of place. Unless, they were like me and had just watched the first season before watching this episode, they would be clueless as to who the hell this Taisha person was. Even if they explained it again in this episode, it would appear to come out of left field, and the show must stand on its own 2 feet, and can't depend on people having read the books in order to understand the plot of the show. So in this, I think it was a very good call. So Taisha wasn't the main relationship in the show that had been established to mean a lot to Tyrion like it was in the books. Like I've been explaining throughout this entire video, it was Shae. So it was a natural progression to change the focus of why Tyrion killed his father from Taisha to Shae, the woman the show clearly established he loved and whom he was forced to kill mostly because of his father's actions. I also heard some people complaining that Tyrion's motivation for killing Tywin didn't quite add up in the show without the Taisha factor, to which I would reply, watch season 3 again. The show did an excellent job of setting up the conflict between Tywin and Tyrion and making it clear how Tywin wished Tyrion dead. And with this trial, not only was he going to finally get his wish, but he turned his own lover against him and was sleeping with her. A crystal clear motivation for murder if I've ever seen one. Personally, I felt Tyrion in the books was a lot stupider than Tyrion in the show, because in the books it was obvious that Shae was just using him, and he was a fool to actually think they loved each other. Whereas in the show they did really love each other, and that love ended tragically when his plans to save her life completely backfired on him, mainly due to the actions of his own father. So as I said at the start, if you didn't like your show's storyline, I'm not trying to say you're wrong or to diminish your opinion in any way. You have every right to it. I would only ask, however, that you not mix up or confuse events in the show from events in the books. And if you're going to make a judgment on the show, judge it on its own merits. And I personally loved her storyline from the show, and I think it was one of the highlights of the first 4 seasons, and its tragic ending in season 4 finale, The Children, is one of the main reasons why I consider that episode my second favorite episode of Game of Thrones. So that's it for my Why I Thought Shae's Storyline Was Awesome video. Please check out my channel for other Game of Thrones videos, and subscribe to keep up with future Game of Thrones videos I'll be doing, and thanks a lot for watching.